Thank you for joining us for this first ever MCC webinar, a behind the scenes look at Mennonite Central Committee's work. Thank you for your ongoing support for MCC and your interest in our work. We're thrilled that you're part of the MCC story and thrilled that we can offer you this unique view of the way we serve in the name of Christ. My name is Rick Kober-Bauman, and I'm happy to host today. I'm the Executive Director of Mennonite Central Committee Canada. I am coming to you from my home in Shakespeare, Ontario, Canada. I live here with my dear partner, Louise, and we have 3 adult children who are spread across Ontario and Indiana. And I have many years of serving with MCC in multiple parts of Canada, and am very happy to be part of this webinar experience today. So let me just say a little bit about the logistics and how you can have the best possible participation experience. You will be kept muted throughout the webinar. That's probably no surprise to you. If you would like to submit a question, which we certainly encourage you to do, please do that through the Q&A function. If you go to the black toolbar at the bottom of your screen, which shows up whenever you move your mouse, you should see a Q&A function. And so if you enter there, you can type in your questions. You can do that at any time. Submit your questions throughout the webinar. We won't answer them throughout because we want to hear from our presenters, who I'm going to introduce in a moment. Questions will be moderated and curated, so some of you might get an answer typed back to you directly. Others will have your question fed through, and you'll hear it answered publicly in the webinar at the end. So we'll try to address just as many questions as we can, but we may not have time to get to all of them, so thanks for your patience and understanding. There are some questions that have already come in from people who've been eager, who signed up early. There's one about toilet paper that I'm not able to answer, but it might be answered later on. There was another one about our shipments of material resources, our quilts and blankets and things like that. So I'll quickly say a word about that now, but in general, you will hear our panelists answering questions. So yes, material resource centers across Canada are able to be shipping, even though we're closed to the many volunteers, literally thousands, who come in normal times to sew comforters and prepare hygiene kits and pack things for international shipping. But we do have a deep reserve of those kinds of material resource items that are ready to be sent when we're able to do that again. So one last comment about the session, that is that we are recording it, and that will be made available to the public after the presentation. So let me say a little bit about MCC and our centennial. Some of you will know that it was actually 100 years ago now, 1920, when MCC was formed. It was a response of faith and generosity to a group of people in what was southern Russia at the time, what's now Ukraine, facing some deep tragedy and losses. And that generous response of a small group of people here in Canada and the US was the beginning of MCC. And I would say over that century, we have been known to kind of move towards difficulty and trouble and try to respond in a compassionate, love of Christ way to those difficulties. So here we are again in a difficult, and we're saying an unprecedented time in our history because of COVID-19. And again, we're digging into our faith. We're recommitting ourselves to caring for our neighbors, whether those neighbors be our geographic across the street neighbors or people around the globe. We want to continue to be a body of service and generosity. So we know that in a time like this, it's a time of fear, of isolation. And we continue to have a vision of worldwide communities being reconciled with God, one another, and creation. And we think that vision is particularly vital right now. So given that we had a centennial campaign and a centennial celebrations planned, we are, as you can imagine, making some significant adjustments. Our fundraising campaign has shifted. Rather than raising, we had hoped, $10 million in new funds and and another 20 million in identified estate gifts, that was for new projects to grow and expand work that we were already doing. You can imagine that, like many other charitable organizations, we are now recognizing that our income line is going to change. Our revenues are going to change as people have to make different decisions about their giving. And so we're continuing with our Centennial campaign, but it will now be to continue ongoing work that we were already doing, and especially work that is a response to COVID-19 challenges. We know that much of our work, for instance, our water, sanitation, and hygiene, is highly responsive to the pandemic, is helping vulnerable communities either prevent or at least slow the transmission of COVID-19. So we want to redouble our efforts and to make sure that our best work on COVID-19 responsive projects is highlighted and able to be funded and continue. So today we want to, as we said in the introduction here, we want to take you a little bit behind the scenes, and we've chosen our work in two specific places, in Syria and Lebanon and in the Democratic Republic of Congo. So we are going to introduce our presenters in just a moment. In both these countries, we are working with highly vulnerable populations, displaced populations, families that have needed to be on the move, often because of violence. So our presenters are going to each take about 10 minutes to give you a snapshot of the work in their area. And then we're going to open it to you. Hopefully questions will have come in by then, and we'll give you a chance to perhaps hear your own question answered or hear responses to others. First, I want to introduce Gary Mayhew. I have fond memories of Gary from my opportunity to visit in Syria. It is now over 2 years ago. It was February of 2018, pardon me. And Gary, I'm sure you remember too, that there were both images of hope and images of real devastation in Syria at the time. I have a memory of being at a Valentine's dinner in Homs, in the city of Homs, listening to a baritone soloist in a restaurant that was quite surrounded by devastation at the time. So that's a part of the context that I remember. Gary is originally from London in the UK, grew up spending much of his time in the Middle East, completed his Bachelor of Science in Geography and GIS at Northwest Missouri State University in 2002, and then an MA in International Development at Fuller Theological Seminary in California, 2011. Gary spent much of his adult life living and working overseas, involved with international relief and development work since 2004. Gary's married to Kate, and they have two daughters, Brooklyn and Addison. And after working with MCC in Afghanistan and Indonesia, Gary is, along with Kate, our representative in the role for MCC in Syria and Lebanon. Olivia Osley, his colleague, will be joining him in presenting today. Olivia is originally from Lakeland, Florida, and of course currently is in Beirut as part of the MCC team there. She is the program coordinator for MCC Lebanon and Syria. Olivia completed her Bachelor of Science in Social Justice, Nonprofit Management, and Environmental Justice from Trevecca Nazarene University in 2014, and has an MA in International Development from Eastern University in 2017. During her master's, she also joined Mennonite Central Committee's Serving and Learning Together, or SALT program, where she served in Cairo, Egypt for 2 years as a psychosocial caseworker for unaccompanied children and youth refugees from the Horn of Africa and from Syria. And in 2019, she moved to Beirut to join the team of MCC Lebanon and Syria there. So those are our two presenters from the Syria-Lebanon community. Now I'd like to introduce you to Mulanda Jimmy Juma and Talina Matthews. Mulanda, I have a memory, Mulanda, of meeting you at the Africa Peace Network gathering in Johannesburg now 3 years ago, I think. Mulanda is originally from the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo. He holds a doctoral degree in politics, human rights, and sustainability from Scuola Superiore Sant'Anna in Italy. Mulanda, you can help me with pronunciation later. He also holds a master's degree in peace studies from the University of KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa, and another master's in the electoral policy and administration, also from Sant'Anna, Italy. Dr. Juma is a research fellow in the Department of Systematic Theology at the University of the Free State in Bloemfontein in South Africa, and is the former coordinator of peace studies and a senior lecturer in applied ethics at St. Augustine College of South Africa in Johannesburg. Presently, Dr. Juma is the country director for Mennonite Central Committee in the Democratic Republic of Congo and Angola. He has previous MCC experience in Southern Africa as our peace coordinator and as a service worker, and has been given coordination to the MCC Africa Peacebuilding Institute for 9 years. He has a number of other experiences working at peacebuilding internationally, has published widely articles and book chapters, and is one of the initiators of peace clubs with MCC in Zambia. His colleague, Talina Matthews, is from my own neighborhood here in Ontario, Canada. We're not sure if she's going to be able to introduce or be able to join us today. So if she is able to join us, I will give a more detailed introduction to her at that time. So those are our guest presenters. I hope that your connections are good. And I am now going to invite Gary Mayhew, our leader in Syria and Lebanon, to give his presentation. Welcome, Gary.
Great, thanks, Rick. Thanks so much for that introduction. I am just going to attempt to share my screen here to pull up our PowerPoint.
I love the call to prayer behind you there, Gary.
Can everyone see that? Okay, great. First, we just wanted to say thanks for everyone being a part of this webinar and showing an interest in our work in Lebanon and Syria. We're just going to start. We don't have a lot of time, but Olivia and I are just going to give a little bit of context to our situation. So for Syria, we manage both programs, Lebanon and Syria. But for Syria, as many of you know, it's now in its 10th year of war. I've personally been fortunate enough to visit Syria 5 times since we started this role. And I can say, as Rick said earlier, it's really something quite unbelievable. It's quite hard to put words to the visit. You travel across the country and you see cities lie in ruins from one city into the next. The scale of displacement is hard to fathom. There's 6.2 million people that have been displaced internally in the country. And one of the shocking things is they haven't just been displaced once, but it's multiple displacements. And there's 5.3 million Syrian refugees in neighboring countries, including Lebanon. While the government has reclaimed many parts of the country, the conflict does continue, and it seems that there's no peace agreement in sight on the various political tracks. And there was also a recent new wave of violence that many of you would have seen on the news, where about 1 million people were displaced just recently in the last few months in northwest Syria. On top of this, you have a collapsing economy. You have 40% of schools across the country that have been destroyed. You have millions of children remaining out of school. And you have 46% of hospitals that have been destroyed. And many of the most educated have left, including doctors. Of course, the COVID-19 situation further complicates all of this, which we'll share a bit later, but I'll hand it over to Olivia for Lebanon.
All right, to give a little context about Lebanon and where we're serving, about 30% of Lebanon's total population is actually made up of refugees who are mostly Syrian, which is pretty significant for such a tiny little country. Despite having so many refugees currently, in recent years, Lebanon has been relatively stable. However, currently we're seeing that situation now change a bit due to recent political instability and an economic crisis that is growing. And as Gary said, now you have the added coronavirus to the situation. So all of these factors are putting a bit of increasing pressure on some of the relationships between local Lebanese and then the large refugee community, which has a bit of a large effect on Lebanon's social stability overall. So that's kind of what we're seeing currently today.
So one of the huge needs that has happened as a result of the war has been the need for food, and this need continues. We are really proud that MCC has been able to respond to this consistently for the last 7 years in Lebanon and Syria. In Syria, we distribute food baskets like the one in the picture on your screen to 33,000 people monthly. And in Lebanon, we give cash vouchers to 3,000 families each month that they can buy groceries at various stores. And we really like the dignity that this gives people in buying their own food. We would love to do this in Syria too, but unfortunately it's just not available. And so we do distribute in this way in Syria. And again, we've been doing this consistently for 7 years. I can say that these projects are saving lives. In many ways, during my visits, these are the hardest projects to visit. In Syria, you often see families living in makeshift shelters or tents, abandoned buildings, old farm buildings. I visited one family that there was just 3 mothers in an abandoned building and there was 20 children. And I think the thing that struck me the most was just seeing that the children had absolutely nothing to play with. There was no ball, there was no coloring, they were just sitting there. So despite the challenges of visiting these projects and seeing the difficult conditions, people are consistently so grateful for the ongoing support that we do. And they often say that they wouldn't be able to meet their food needs without the project.
Okay, so another area of focus for both of our programs in Lebanon and Syria is that we're meeting relief needs through various projects that we have. This mainly happens through MCC's Material Resource Center, through sending containers, and also through winter assistance projects. So in Syria and Lebanon, it can get pretty cold in the winter. And a lot of people, as we've said, are displaced. So that often means they're coming from where they used to live to a second location. Oftentimes it's not some place that is necessarily adequate shelter. So, and in combination with having a lower income, it's a struggle for people to stay warm in the winter. So our winterization and assistance program or projects offer people winter clothes, access to fuel and heaters to ensure that that basic need is getting met as the seasons change. And so we also, as I said, we ship several containers per year to Syria and Lebanon from the MCC's Material Resource Center. A lot of times the items in these containers include canned meat, hygiene kits, school kits, relief kits, and then of course the handmade comforters, which are all assembled by volunteers in the Material Resource Center. So it really gives a lot of the items a nice personal touch, which we really appreciate and feel really connects all of MCC globally. So I got to go to a distribution in March, actually, in Lebanon. in the south of Beirut with one of our partners who was distributing hygiene kits, relief kits, and comforters to Palestinian and Syrian refugees. And I really loved getting to see our partner handle the distribution in a really dignified way, the relationships that they have with the communities that they're serving. And then it was really cool to see the excitement over the handmade comforters, because it's quite a special item that we get a lot of feedback about.
Okay, thanks, Olivia. So we've talked about some of our relief needs in food and blankets and other supplies. Again, often like these projects are very difficult because they're very much survival for people. But one of the things that's really given us a lot of hope lately is we've been moving into this new area of livelihoods, which is helping people restart their businesses, giving different trainings in different locations that people didn't have access to. And we started a number of these projects as pilot projects last year. And we've just been so impressed how they're going. I mean, whenever you start a pilot, you know, it's a pilot for a reason, to test it out, see what's working, what's working. But we've been so thankful for how these are going. Of course, for us, there's always a tension ongoing in our program. Do we divert our time and effort and resources into relief needs, or do we go more into these early recovery, livelihoods? And that's really challenging for us, because the needs, they're both there. The relief needs are there with the war, and that yet these projects really help people kind of move beyond relief and rebuild their lives. Last December, I got to go into Syria and see a number of these projects around the country. And again, I was just so impressed. They were restoring hope to people. And many of the projects we've done have been things like restarting farms by helping buy livestock, restarting bakeries, welding businesses, small grocery shops, small clothing shops, fixing mobile phones, and much more. And often these initiatives are not a lot to really get people back on their feet. This picture was in eastern Aleppo, which many of you know was very destroyed in the war in 2016. This would have been on the news for many of you. Actually, this part of the city is 65% destroyed. And in this photo, there's two brothers standing on the right. Before the war, they had a carpentry business, and it was a very successful business. And when the war started, they had to flee this area as it came under siege, and everything was destroyed. They were in the basement of this building. This was all destroyed, and all their equipment was looted. And really, for most of the war, they were unable to provide for their families. They had to depend on relief donations. And just last year, they were helped to restart their business. And so the basement was restored, and some of the equipment they were able to purchase. And I was just struck by how proud they were. They were so proud to be starting, to be providing for their families. This was a multi-generational business for them that had been completely destroyed. And you know, they were just starting. I mean, they didn't have a lot of business. It was just starting to get going. They were getting some contracts to make furniture for stores. And they realized that it potentially would take decades to rebuild their business into what it was. And they were both saying, you know, we're older, you know, we don't have a lot of time, but they were so determined to do it as a way of passing on this business to the next generation, to their children. And I was just so impressed with them, and so many more people like this that I met, determined to move beyond the war and rebuild their lives.
All right. So I'll talk a little bit about the response to COVID-19 that we're currently involved with here in Lebanon and Syria. This is a situation where we feel really grateful to be able to respond to the really critical needs that we're seeing here in Lebanon and that we are hearing about in Syria. So Our response to the coronavirus in both countries is a project through distributing specialized hygiene kits and informational pamphlets to beneficiaries. The pamphlets have written in Arabic information from the World Health Organization regarding information about how to take necessary precautions and to prevent the spread of coronavirus. And items in these hygiene kits are going to contain bars of soap, hand sanitizer, cleaning cloths, bleach, toilet paper, various items like this, so that we can really work on the end of prevention. Currently in Lebanon, we have about 658 cases of coronavirus. The participants of the project that are going to be receiving our hygiene kits in Lebanon are Palestinian, Lebanese, and Syrian refugee families who are living in about 11 communities in Beirut and South Lebanon. They're in communities that are referred to as gatherings, which are people that live outside of the official UN refugee camps. So the conditions in these communities are quite crowded, and they make them people that live there especially vulnerable to a spreading of coronavirus. So for this reason, we feel it's really important to distribute hygiene kits and information and knowledge. In Syria right now, there's only about 30 official cases, but we anticipate the impact of coronavirus in Syria to be quite severe given the past history of the war, the ongoing conflict, the state of the country, and then the current lack of quality healthcare and just damaged healthcare system in general. According to the UN Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, only about half of their hospitals are operational, which would be quite detrimental to the situation if an outbreak is to really ramp up in numbers. So we're responding to these needs in 6 different areas in Syria, distributing kits and information to 9,000 Syrian families, which would be about 45,000 people, in hopes of preventing the spread of a really serious outbreak, because the consequences, like I said, would be especially devastating in Syria.
Okay, as far as what's next and for our program and where we hope to go. So one thing that we as a team have been quite burdened about is the trauma needs in the country. Save the Children produced a report in 2016 called Invisible Wounds, and it said that the trauma children were experiencing in Syria was unlike something that the organization had witnessed before in their global work. Many children, as you know, have spent the majority of their childhood affected by the sounds of bombs and violence. And again, we're really thankful that as MCC, we've been responding to this in the last year with trauma awareness trainings, coping mechanism trainings. We've had trainings with families and teachers and how to care for themselves and how to care for their children that they care for. We've also been supporting something that again has been more of a pilot project called Child-Friendly Spaces. And these are safe spaces in Syria where children can come and learn and play and receive trauma support and care. So while we've been supporting these projects, we are also aware that the needs are just so great in this area. In conflict zones, when the conflict calms down, which is the case in different parts of Syria, you unfortunately often see a huge spike in trauma. And this is because during the fighting, people often kick into a survival mode, but when things calm down, everything begins to crash around them. So now in Syria, we are seeing significant increases in depression, in anxiety, in PTSD, and suicide. And for the last year, we've been working on a trauma strategy that covers the next 5 years of where we want to go in programming. And so we're really hoping to raise funds for this and to move forward in that. Another area that we hope to move forward in is just what we mentioned about the wanting to increase work in livelihoods, again, seeing the impact that this has had and wanting to help more people move beyond the war and start rebuilding their lives. And I mean, there's so many areas, but another area, of course, would be supporting education. This again is something that we have been doing, but we want to do more of. Children have been out of school for years, and there's a need for them to get back into school and to catch up. This is really a whole generation that have lost in this area. So I think our time is up, and we just want to say in conclusion, just such a huge thanks to all of you who have and continue to support MCC in different ways. The impact in Syria and Lebanon from your support has been something really indescribable. Seeing the impact firsthand on the ground, something that Olivia and I get the privilege of doing, and the thousands of lives that these projects continue to help year after year in so many ways, whether it's again providing food or helping people start their lives again with businesses or begin to heal from trauma for the first time. It's, again, for us, it's been incredible to witness, and we couldn't do it without you. And so from the bottom of our hearts, we are so, so thankful.
Yes, thank you.
And thank you, Olivia and Gary. I certainly echo your thanks to the many others who are listening and watching here. But really for that very helpful walk through Syria and Lebanon, you know, the mention of handmade blankets, those gifts of love that communicate something that is just not communicated by anything other than what we know has been touched and made and sewn lovingly by some hands and then placed into hands in Syria and Lebanon. I still remember watching that exchange happen in church basements a few years ago. I also got goosebumpy here as you were talking about the COVID response and the extraordinary vulnerability of populations and communities that you are describing and working with there. And it's so helpful for us to be reminded by you who are up close there of the degree to which we are reaching in and making a very practical and timely response around COVID. And then, Gary, your closing comments about trauma and the depth of ongoing trauma there. Thank you so much. We're going to move in a moment to DR Congo. And this is a reminder to our watchers and listeners that we're eager for your questions. If you've developed some and haven't, you know, you couldn't tear yourself away from listening to Olivia and Gary, take a moment and tap those into the question and answer. And we'll be picking those questions up at the end of Mulanda's presentation now. I see his slides are up. So Mulanda, we turn it over to you.
In Eastern Congo. I hope you can hear me clearly where you are. Mulanda Jimmy Juma, as you heard, and my colleague Talina Mathis from Canada is not feeling well. She was prepared for this this meeting. Well, I will take you quickly through the Congo, starting with the map of the Congo. I mean, in Congo we have you know, in Congo we are working in the center of the country as well as in the east of the country. I'm not going to speak about Angola, but I will focus on the Congo. We have 11 partners in this country where we have over 5 million displaced people, and that we are trying to, you know, to help meet their needs and help in their survival, but also working together with the church in order to build the church capacity. Our strategic plan is focusing on peace building and relief for helping those internally displaced people, and on capacity building raising the capacity of the church to be able to meet the needs of those displaced people and other beneficiaries in the communities. So this is the map of the Congo. In the Congo, we work in the Kasai region that you can see in the center of the country. We also work in eastern part of the country. You can see North Kivu and South Kivu. That's where most of the internally displaced people are located. And as I said earlier, we have over 5 million displaced people in the country currently. We respond in the Kasai through the churches, and there are 3 Mennonite church communities. There is CFMC, that is the Mennonite Brethren Church in Kikwit, Bandundu province. There is SEMCO, that is the General Conference, Mennonite community in Congo. And there is the SEM, which is the Evangelical Mennonite in Congo. Those are the 3 Mennonite communities that we work with in the Kasai region. And in the Kasai region, the reason why we are working with the Mennonite there is that we really want to build the capacity of the church to be able to respond to the needs of these displaced people, but also to be able to respond to the need of the church as a whole. There was an outbreak of violence in the Kasai in August 2016, and that led to a displacement of 1.4 million people in the Kasai. And so from that time, we began to respond by providing education to those who are displaced, because there are so many children who were displaced, who survived the violence, and who were not able to go to school. Until today, some are still not able to go to school, but we are providing education to 793 children. And these 3 Mennonite communities are providing that support to the children. And they really, really appreciate that very much. We also provide food to over 1,000 families. The average per family in the Kasai region and in Congo in general is 7 people per family. So with over 1,000 families, they receive food, beans, rice, maize, they receive vegetable oil, they receive salt in order to help them survive day by day. I can say thank you to all those who are contributing to this effort and to be able to respond to these needs, because we have saved so many lives in the Kasai region because of this food. And we also provide pig farming. Pig farming is part of the income generating activities, because we came to realize that these IDPs, internally displaced people, are able to produce, and this production can help them to be more sustainable. And so we help them to be able to be more productive, even if they are displaced people. And so we help these families who are beneficiaries of food distribution, of education, to be able to be productive through pig farming activities. And so, for example, the Mennonite Brethren in Kikwit are doing that activity, but also SEMCO, that is the General Conference in Chikapa. There is also an agriculture project which goes along with that, so that they can be productive as part of the income generating activities. We are also providing health support in terms of medication to displaced people in that part of the world. And there are, for example, in Kikwit region, there are 400 families benefiting from health services, because we're able to provide such services there. And there's also women's situation room exchange programs. And this is also part of the peace building program. we realized that in our society, women are excluded, but also they are the primary victims of violence, including their children as well. And so we came up with a program to help women form small groups where they can work together to protect their rights, to take part in the leadership, but also in the development, rather than being sidelined and staying out of the whole development, peace building process. And this has helped the church, the three Mennonite churches actually to come together. A lot of visitations, because before that, I have to say that Mennonite, the three Mennonite communities were not really speaking to each other very well. They were not really open to communication among them. But through these Kasai Response Project, and especially through trauma healing project, as well as Women's Situation Room Exchange, they have really opened up and they have improved their relationship within those and among those three communities. And through those, they are able now to begin to resolve conflict among them, but also outside in the community. One of the good stories that came from the trauma healing is that there was a lady, I know her personally because every time I went there during distribution, she was not open to, to talk to people. She was not smiling. But after she attended the trauma healing workshop run by the three Mennonite communities, she began to open up. She began to smile. She began to feel good about herself, and she began to have hope. And from that time, she now goes on to counsel, to advise, to mobilize other women that we can overcome this sadness. We can overcome the bad experience we had. This woman actually lost her husband, who was beheaded by a combatant. And she is smiling now because of the opportunity to attend trauma healing workshop. Next. We could move to the next slide. Oasis is also another partner in Eastern Congo, and they work in the Fizi and Uvira area in South Kivu, part of the country. And there is over 180,000 displaced people. This Oasis of Culture is a women-led organization. And they work together to meet the needs of those displaced people in the community. And so they provide education they provide education to 297 children in their community there. And those beneficiaries are actually internally displaced children. They have formed Women's Situation Room group. I just defined what it is. So they have 12 women's situation groups. They have played a significant role working with the Mennonite women to begin to form, women's situation room groups in other places as well. There are very good stories coming out of that. Maybe that would be part of some of the questions we can answer later, of women resolving conflict between communities, between fighting groups where men have actually failed. And those are some of the benefits that come out of Women's Situation Room. There are also food security project, agriculture project. They are providing support to 325 households to be able to produce food. As you can see in those pictures there, some of the food in the picture above is actually distribution, but the one at the bottom is the food that they are producing themselves. We also have ECC Meru North Kivu. ECC Meru North Kivu is the Council of Churches of Christ in Congo, and this is one of the old partners we have, and a very, very strong partner. They are working in Minova, which is about 100 kilometers away from where we are in Goma town. And they are providing support to 792 families. All these families are internally displaced families because of the war. And their work, they have four types of four types of project that they are working on, and the one is food distribution. So they do provide food to internally displaced people and agriculture in Shasha, Mubimbi camps. They provide education to 365 children. They provide taps because these families that are running away, they don't run with anything. And so they need support as they come to live in displaced camps. They are also providing health through the clinic. Now, there is one story to share from there. There is a woman whom I met in the camp, and I talked to her. She was raped by 5 combatants, and she had 5 children, and she had to run for her life with her kids. And when she came to the camp, as she was running, her husband, when her husband heard that she was raped, he actually left her. And so she was left with these 5 children to take care while she's actually going through this traumatic experience of being raped. Thanks to the camp and thanks to ECC Meru North Kivu and MCC support, she was able to take care of these children. She was able to have hope to live because of the food she got, because of the tap she got, because of the water she got, because of the education that children got. And so we put smile on her face and on the face of children through the support that we offer. And she is alive today because of that. We can move to the last one. What are the biggest need? The biggest need that are there currently is food, training, and wash. That is water and soap. Congo has suffered from Ebola crisis. It is also suffering now from COVID-19. And this has been going on for a long time, and we don't know where's the end for this. I just want to say thank you so much to all of you who are contributing to our program in Congo, but to MCC in general, but also for all your prayers. Praying for us is also very important for us. I personally am speaking to you now as one of those survivors who survived because of MCC support. And I'm very grateful to all of you who are there, who actually helped me to survive as a displaced person, as a refugee, but also who are helping other people through our Congo program as well. Thank you so much.
Mulanda, thank you. Thank you for that personal testimony there in those last moments, and also for the very significant glimpse into life and the ministry there of MCC in Congo. I was particularly touched by your comments about the gender sensitivity, the way that trauma and violence affects women, and how you're working very intentionally to take that extra seriously. Thank you. We have some time left for questions here, and thankfully there are questions coming in. Please feel free to keep entering those into the Q&A. I'm going to start with one that's maybe on a little bit the lighter side. This one comes from Winnipeg, where someone is saying, in Winnipeg, we can't find things like yeast, flour, toilet paper, and to that I know some have added the other hair color and cutting utensils. So what are the things that are hard for you to find and for people in your communities to find during these COVID days? Well, why don't we go back to Syria, Lebanon, and give Mulanda a few minutes to catch his breath. Gary or Olivia?
Yeah, we're facing challenges, different challenges for Syria and for Lebanon. For Lebanon, Lebanon imports 95% or so of its goods, and so we're facing many challenges with either things not coming in due to the crisis, or prices going up because it's more difficult to get them in. So we're seeing. I don't have time to kind of go through all the background, but some of you would know that Lebanon's been having about 6 months of protests, of revolution, and this has been followed by an economic crisis in the country, and now the COVID-19 crisis has added a layer onto that. So yeah, supplies are dwindling in stores. You can find toilet paper, but you can't find many other supplies. And in Syria, the challenge, again, is the border is shut, where much of the imports into Syria were going through Lebanon. That border has been closed. The port is still open, but of course, Syria is heavily sanctioned, and so it's very difficult to get things in. We're deeply concerned about that with the COVID-19, because even medical supplies is very difficult to get in due to the borders closing and sanctions. And so they're also facing shortages of supplies.
Thanks, Gary. I think just because we want to get more variety of questions here, Mulanda, I'm going to come back to you with a slightly different question. Someone has asked, what are the prospects for internally displaced people in DR Congo to return to their homes?
Oh, yeah. Well, the prospects are that if we can have peace in the country, then people will be able to go back. Every time we speak to internally displaced people, they say we want to go back to our communities, but we can't go there because there's no peace. And for us to be able to have peace, I think we must have good leadership at top level, but also at other levels of the society as well in Congo. Yeah, and that might take some time.
Thank you, Mulanda. Just a reminder to people, if you're watching the clock, we're not very many minutes from the top of the hour, but we're not going to be too particular about stopping right on the dot, so please feel free to stay on. And there are questions coming, and we'll continue to engage our guests here for a little past the hour. This is a question about COVID-19. Someone simply asking for a little more information about how COVID-19 is impacting MCC programming. Olivia, could we start with you on this one? You've already said a bit, but can you take us a little deeper?
Well, right now we've been having a couple weeks of shifts with partners. A lot of project activities are not able to be happening right now. So it's been a lot of conversation about how we can mitigate that. And because there's so many unknowns, like globally, that's obviously a part of the conversation, like what we can do when we do start to know more, when we can resume activities. A lot has been initially trying to get everyone's feet on the ground and adjust so that we can have those productive conversations. But right now, with some of the projects that are not specifically like COVID-19, we're talking with partners about what they can put in place to be preventing the spread when they do get back together, to resume activities, and like by equipping partners with the necessary sanitary items that they need, keeping space between people. We are still doing distributions for food, which are necessary, but those have been really large conversations that we've had with partners to ensure that we can still continue doing that in the safest way possible, and while still like trying to combat the spread of the virus.
Helpful. Thanks, Olivia. Gary, anything else you want to add?
Yeah, just to add on to what Olivia said, when the crisis hit and the country began to go into lockdown, now we have a curfew, and cars can only go on the road at certain days. So it's very, very locked down. But from the beginning, we had to really identify what is the critical life-saving activities that have to continue. And so our partners have been great about that. We've just been teaming up. We've been sharing lots of resources from WHO and others, how to set up distributions in a safe way. I mean, we have even tape on the ground, like you're probably seeing in Canada, the grocery stores, to where people stand and distribution lines. So we've kept quite busy trying to kind of get up to speed with that. But as Olivia said, some of the other programming in peace building and education has been put on hold due to the nature of not being able to gather together.
And how about in DR Congo, Mulanda? What are some of the specific impacts on MCC programming there from COVID-19?
There's cut down on activities, so partners are not really able to move freely around to go and do their activities. At the moment, I mean, what we hear from partners is that there are a lot of needs, especially in the area of water, sanitation, soap, and things like that. And partners are not really able to respond to so many needs. But there are some partners who, in response to COVID-19, who are creating awareness in the communities, distributing pamphlets, talking on radios, about how people can stay safe through this crisis.
Thank you. Someone's asked a question about advocacy, noting that in both places, all of the places that you've been speaking to us about, there's ongoing conflict, violent conflict. What might we be doing to advocate here in Canada with Canadian government to address root causes of some of these violent struggles? I didn't pick somebody. Gary, you were in the middle last time. Let's start with you.
Yeah, I can jump in. I actually just got out of our monthly advocacy meeting a couple hours earlier. So we meet with the different MCC advocacy offices, and we do that once a month, and we try to really raise awareness to needs that we're seeing on the ground with partners that might not always get out might not get out on the media as much. One thing that we've continued to do with the Canadian government is really advocate for more peace building funds. We really see that a lot of these root causes need to be addressed, and these are not areas that the government is giving a lot of funds to, and so we're often putting strong asks and advocacies to say, hey, this is what we're doing. This is some of the success stories we've had on the ground. We had amazing work happening during the height of the war in Aleppo, with peace theaters going on in Aleppo while bombs were dropping, and we've had other innovative projects going on during the conflict, and just really trying to highlight that and asking our governments to invest more in that.
Olivia, anything you want to add from your perspective there?
I think Gary covered it well.
Great. Mulanda, let's shift to you in DR Congo.
Advocacy happens at various levels. At local level, that's where we are encouraging church leaders to actually work with other stakeholders like government and others to be able to prevent for example, COVID from spreading, but also around this time to be able to work with those fighting groups who are bringing violence or fighting against those who are providing medical services to be able to protect them. But also advocacy can happen at international level, like in North America, where there's need to advocate for countries there to support Africa and provide more funding to Africa to be able to address the needs on the ground, to be able to get people to be able to access water, but also hygiene kits, soap, and so on and so forth. But debt is also a big issue for African countries. I think it's time to see how we could help African countries, maybe not to pay debts that they own to Western countries.
Thank you. Earlier on, we had some conversation right at the outset about material resources And what kind of supplies are there in material resource centers here in Canada and in the US? Olivia, I think you particularly talked about some of the distribution that's happening. What about actual shipping? Gary, you said a port is open. Are material resources actually able to move into the country during these times of lockdown? What more can you say about those movement and shipment options?
I can answer that.
Olivia, please.
So currently, like Gary said, the port in Syria and Latakia is actually open. So we are able to ship there currently. And that's in the works for us right now. But currently for Lebanon, the port is still closed, and we're just kind of waiting to see when that would happen. And then hopefully we can resume the containers that we normally have year round.
I assume that, like with food distribution, you've talked about material resource distribution happens under different kinds of rules and parameters than it would have pre-COVID. Yeah,
exactly. That'll definitely be a part of the conversation that we have with the partners for material resource projects moving forward. So a preliminary conversation for the next couple months for sure.
And in Congo, Mulanda, what is your experience with the movement and shipment of material resources now?
In Congo, it's very difficult. It has been difficult even before that, and getting material resources in the country, going through the custom, it's not easy, I would say, and that's why we prefer buying everything within the country to be able to meet those needs.
Yeah. And another important area we could talk about, what's the difference between things that are shipped from the US and Canada versus those things that you purchase locally. We're a little past the top of the hour. I think I'm going to ask each of you to say, as you speak to the group of people gathered here on the webinar, what would you ask people to pray for? What would you ask people to pray for in these times, given where you are with partners that you see or can't always see because of COVID? Gary, I'm going to start with you, and we'll have each of you speak to this. What would you ask us to pray for in these days?
Well, I'm sure Mulanda will say this, a similar thing, that I think being on the ground, you feel the pressure on both sides. We see the economic crisis that Canada and the US are going into and how that affects funding. And then we just see the needs just increase on the ground. And I mean, of course, it's beyond MCC, it's beyond us, and just to keep praying for those who are most vulnerable in Lebanon and Syria, having increasing needs. Even the Lebanese now have increasing needs with the economic crisis that's come on before the COVID-19. And I think praying for the team is often a lot to carry, sort of seeing these increasing needs as a team, wanting to respond as much as we can, and just praying. I know, like many of you on this webinar, juggling kids at home and work and trying to keep going, just that there would be grace for all of us on the ground.
Well said, Gary. Thank you. Olivia.
Yeah, to kind of go off of that a little bit, I think a really nice thing to pray for would be resilience for our partners, for us, and also everybody that's experiencing all the strain and the stress in all the countries that we're working in. I think that would be a really, really appreciated thing to pray for.
Thank you, Olivia. Thank you. And Mulanda.
Congo has had over 2,000 deaths due to Ebola, and is still continuing. Now we have 254 cases of COVID, and it's continuing. And so the prayer will be to pray to God that they should come to an end. Not only in Congo, but around the world, but also to pray for MCC as a whole, donors, beneficiaries, partners, staff members around the world, and also to pray for there to be enough funding for us to be able to respond to the needs on the ground.
Thank you, Jimmy. And from your colleagues here that are part of this today, Jimmy and Gary and Olivia, please be assured, first of all, of our gratitude for your preparations and sharing today, and of our prayers of the kind that you asked for, and more generally for each of you and your families and MCC's partners and colleagues there. We have had a glimpse of just how much strain and weight it is that you're carrying. Thank you for also sharing hopeful stories, stories of people rising above and sharing across neighborhoods. Thank you for those. Thank you also now to all of you who have joined us today. Thanks for your engagement with MCC in the many ways you engage as supporters and donors. We couldn't do this work without you. I don't want to be glib about that, but really to recognize the absolutely foundational way in which you allow the kind of work that we've seen today in Syria, Lebanon, and DR Congo to happen. We're deeply grateful for that, and we want you to stay engaged with MCC. So do stay tuned. There's an upcoming May podcast that we're calling Relief, Development, and Podcast. There'll be more details about that. It won't be visual, so you won't get to see anybody in a bow tie that time around, but we hope you come back and join us. Again, our gratitude for joining us today, our gratitude to our presenters. We would end with saying our vision of sharing God's love and compassion for all in the name of Christ is now more than ever a valuable vision that we want to share with the world and the community. Thanks for joining us. Thanks be to God.